So look, I understand that we are a day removed from Dallas's big victory over Washington in the sense of the repercussions that lands Dallas. And it's time to start looking at the NFC playoff picture with 4 games to go. It's really imperative that Dallas tries to do the best that it can, albeit a lot of it has to go their way in terms of other teams tripping in front of them if they're trying to move up in seeding. But in terms of where they stand now, they are all but a foregone conclusion to win the NFC East and secure a playoff spot. There are 2 playoff scenarios for the Dallas Cowboys in Week 15. With a victory, they will clinch a playoff spot. And with a win and a Eagles win over Washington, they will clinch the NFC East title with a strength of victory tiebreaker. I think that if you're the Dallas Cowboys, regardless of what happens in Week 15, whether you do win the division or not, I think it's important that you continue to play as much as you can until you know that you cannot move up a spot. So, in today's video, what we're going to take a look at is where the Dallas Cowboys sit now with the remainder of their schedule. And then we're going to take a look at other NFC teams that are in front of them, more notably the 3 other division leaders. And is it possible for Dallas to get a higher seed, and what would it take to move up a spot? So before we get into that, if you guys could do me a favor and make sure to like, comment, subscribe, do all that stuff, that would be greatly appreciated. The reason I mention that is because a good chunk of you, over 90%, are not subscribed. So if this is the type of content that you enjoy and you keep coming back for, might as well slap a subscription here so you don't miss out on new content. So let's go ahead and get started with Dallas's remaining schedule. So with Dallas's schedule, as you can see, they are in a situation where they're playing all NFC teams, which is a good thing and also could be a bad thing, especially with seeding if they drop some games. But when you look at where Dallas sits currently, they have 3 AFC losses, and that first NFC loss was Week 1 versus Tampa Bay, which is extremely impressive that they are now 8-1 in the conference. I did have Dallas at 8-5 at this point in my preseason prediction, so they are currently exceeding my prediction of a 12-5 record, assuming that they win out. They have New York on deck. Then they have the football team once again at home. Then you have the Cardinals in a primetime matchup, most likely to determine whether or not Dallas moves up in seeding, which we'll get into later in the video about scenarios. Then you have the Cowboys going to Philadelphia to play the Eagles in what could possibly be a meaningless game or a very important game for Dallas to move up a spot in seeding depending on certain circumstances. So with all that out of the way, when you look at this schedule, it is realistically possible that Dallas does go 3-1 in these stretch of games. I do think they will defeat the Giants in New York, which would put them at a 10-4 record. And then they have the football team at home, and I think that if Dallas gets out of the funk they're in and they don't screw around, I can see them winning that game. I did say, and I'll keep harping back to this because this is a huge focal point, is that this Washington team can give you fits, and they were giving the Dallas Cowboys some fits towards the end of the game. You know, I understand that Dallas more or less was kind of trying to give them the game at that point. All joking aside, though, that's a game where it's like you kind of have to just capitalize on the quick turnaround, especially since you basically deflated them after their 4-game win streak. The big primetime game against the Cardinals will be the telling point of where Dallas sits at their current status, because if they roll into that game at 11-4, there's a strong possibility that if one of the other teams in front of them falters, and especially if it's the Cardinals, because this video is coming out before the Monday night game, and I'm going to be watching that, because if the Rams manage to pull off a victory, the Cowboys can manage to move up in seeding, which would be very damn good. I just want them to make sure they take care of business. The Dallas Cowboys ultimately have to win out to have a possible chance at moving up. If they get another loss, it's all but certain they're going to be the NFC's 4th seed. and we'll get into kind of like the matchups in the playoffs to where what would be an optimal run for the Cowboys if they're trying to win a playoff game or two. So, if you win that game, you're 12-4. You play Philly in Philadelphia, and if you manage to win that game, you are 13-4. So, with that being said, let's take a look at each of the leading NFC teams to determine, where are they at currently, and more importantly, is there a possibility they trip up before the season is over to allow Dallas to kind of swoop in and get that number 1 seed. So let's start off going from the 3rd, 2nd to 1st seed. And so that means we'll move on to Tampa Bay. So with Tampa, they're currently 10-3 after their victory over the Bills in overtime. I know many Cowboys fans that were watching that game for the sake of if Dallas could move up a spot in the standings. You're looking at that and you're saying, you know what, that's a possible lost opportunity if things went their way. But regardless of what happened, even if the Buccaneers lost that game, Dallas would still have remained the 4th seed in the NFC because that's an AFC loss right there. But when you look at the remainder of the Buccaneers schedule, I doubt they slip up at any point in time. They play the Saints at home, they played the Panthers on the road, they played the Jets on the road, and then they finish with the Panthers at home. For me, I don't see the Buccaneers losing another game this season, so there is a strong possibility that they have the opportunity to finish 13-4. The only game that they could possibly trip up against would be the Saints, but the problem is the Saints have not looked good ever since that initial Buccaneers game that they had in Week 8. So if you're looking for the Buccaneers to lose ground, I doubt they do. So I think we can just, mark that up as a no for Tampa Bay. So let's move on to Green Bay, who's currently the 2nd seed. So now when you look at Green Bay, you see, okay, they're facing a bit more tougher competition, but the problem is when you start looking into this. The Ravens matchup, I think, was a possibility for a loss. But because of Lamar Jackson's injury, you really have to put into question whether they could pull it off. Now, it's not impossible. I think that the Ravens are a fundamentally good football team, and they have Cleveland right on their ass in the division, so they can't afford to trip up. Then they face Cleveland in Green Bay. They play Minnesota in Green Bay, and then they finish off with the Lions. If you are looking at possible losses, these are going to be in the next 2 games. The Vikings game might be a possibility, but I doubt Minnesota sweeps Green Bay. That would be very unlikely there. But I can see a possibility of Green Bay losing these next 2 games, but I have a high doubt that they will do that. I think that they will finish 14-3 probably. But the one thing I will say is when you look at the Packers, they are currently 8-2 in the conference, which is a massive thing if you're watching this race. So if you're looking at the Packers, they just had to lose at least 1 game because then the Cowboys would be able to supersede them in seeding because Dallas would finish with only 1 conference loss. So if you're the Dallas Cowboys, you're really looking at this and you're saying to yourself, you know what, we need to be able to see Green Bay lose a game if you want to move up, but these next 2 weeks are the strongest possibility for that to happen. I don't think that if Green Bay gets past these 2 games, I think they're going to win out. So let's go ahead and let's move over to the number 1 seed and the Arizona Cardinals. So now with Arizona, they have to play on Monday night, and so this could really go a couple ways. The reason why I believe the Cardinals could be the path for the Cowboys to move up in seeding is the fact that they play all NFC teams except for when they play the Colts in Week 16, okay? So if the Cardinals are to lose to the Rams on Monday Night Football, they would end up with a 6-3 conference record. And then you play the Lions. I think that they will beat the Lions, and I think they'll beat the Colts. But for me, Dallas beating the Arizona Cardinals at home would fundamentally solidify themselves in a higher playoff seeding spot. And then they finish off with the Seahawks at home, which Seattle's not really going to care. So they could play spoiler, I don't know. But with all that being said, let's go through scenarios in which the Dallas Cowboys can move up in seeding to the third spot, the second spot, and the first spot. So to start things off with these scenarios and kind of going over what things can happen. The Dallas Cowboys have to win out. So this is going under the assumption that the Dallas Cowboys finish their year 13-4 and other things happen in the meantime. If Dallas wants to move up one spot in the NFC playoff picture and get that third seed, they would have to, number one, hope for a Arizona loss in the span of time that they also beat Arizona, then hope for a Green Bay loss as another possibility. So it involves a Arizona loss or a Green Bay loss and Dallas winning out. Tampa Bay has that head-to-head tiebreaker and stuff like that, so that really throws things into a loop when you look at how things go. So Dallas isn't able to move up in front of Tampa Bay unless other things happen. So now we get into the next set of possibilities. Moving into the second spot. So Dallas wins out, finishes 13-4, and Dallas has to have Arizona and Green Bay lose. Arizona loses another game aside from the Cowboys game because we play them, and Green Bay has to lose at least one game. Or Green Bay and Tampa Bay lose a game, or Arizona loses a game and Tampa Bay loses a game. So basically, out of the three teams, two of them have to lose. Okay? And these tiebreakers go into other things like that, so it's complicated. But based off of the playoff machine, thank you ESPN so much for that, and you can try this out yourself. Based off of what I did, that is how I got to that conclusion. So it involves two of the NFC teams losing a game at least. The final part, the number one seed. It is extremely possible for the Cowboys to get the number one seed if all three teams lose at least one game, aside from Arizona losing to the Cowboys as well. So Arizona would have to lose 2 games, one outside of that Cowboys game, and Green Bay and Tampa Bay have to lose at least one game. If those situations were to happen, the Dallas Cowboys would get the bye week and end up with the number one seed. So to kind of recap, basically, third seed, one of the teams in front of them loses. Second seed, 2 of the teams in front of them lose. The first seed, all of them lose. And Dallas has to win out. If that happens, Dallas is going to be in a much better situation. So with all that being said, the playoff matchups are extremely important. I feel when you look at where Dallas is positioned, they're currently staring down a matchup against the LA Rams in the first round at home in Dallas. For me, especially if it's a team that's hitting their stride, they're going to be tough to beat. And so, and that doesn't mean we can't beat them and I'm afraid of the Rams. I think that when you look at how teams go far in the playoffs, it's all about matchups. I think for the Dallas Cowboys, what you're looking for is a matchup that's favorable to you in the first round, assuming you can't get that number 1 seed. So, for me, you're probably shooting for that number 2 or 3 seed, preferably the 2nd seed, so that you face an opponent at home and you kind of go from there. But, we'll see how things go. I would recommend the Cowboys look at getting the 3rd spot possibly, or the 2nd spot in the NFC, but there's a lot that comes down to it. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is your NFC playoff picture for the Dallas Cowboys. And so, I think that if we're all looking at this together, you kind of have to hope that Dallas gets shit together, number 1, and number 2, they get some luck. As long as Dallas wins out, things will go their way. That's just how I look at it. I think that as long as they're not losing the NFC opponents, but if we lay an egg in one of these games, or hell, if we finish with an 11-6 record, then that's a problem. So I think Dallas is going to end up looking at certain situations. If I'm Dallas, you're playing hard up until the very end. So they're 2-0 in December. We'll see how things go. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a great rest of your day, guys. Bye-bye.